Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk, where we gather worship and communications, musicians, media, tech people from across our 2,100 South Carolina Baptist churches, and we just talk about how we can serve you during the ministry that you're doing. And so I'm excited today. In light of everything that's going on, streaming and technology is continuing to grow, and people are continuing to utilize those resources more. And so I'm excited to have Steve Dirks on today. And Steve is part of a group called 1230 Media, where they produce and assist churches with a variety of resources. Also, he spent some time at Shannon Baptist, and we're just glad for you to be here today, man. Thanks for being on there, Steve.
Thanks, Alex, man. I'm really excited to be here, and just have a heart for the church. I'm a production guy at Shannon Baptist. I was on the team there for 4.5 years in the production world, and then obviously now I work with 1230 Media, where we help do custom and ready-made media for churches to help communicate the mission and vision of your church and transform your worship experience. So thanks for having me,
Yeah,
man.
for sure. Yeah, Steve, I mean, I'm sure have an interesting perspective, because during this, you probably saw churches like go from what is media to yo, I got this ATM black magic board, and I need an SDI. You've probably seen that all over the map. So just kind of give me a touch base of just kind of what you've been seeing like over the past couple months in churches, how they're using media, and what they're doing to get their churches online during this time.
Yeah, it's amazing how God's used COVID to change the game. We're not going back to what it was. And so I think a lot of time, and in January, I was just starting at 1230 and kind of transitioning out of production role at a church. And I think at that point, we still saw churches that some were online and some weren't. But then, February, March hit, and it became everyone had to be online. That's the only way we can engage with our church and reach our community, was by being online. And so it's funny, if you look at our resource list, I created a couple resources early part of this year to help with just getting from nothing to something. And so we created a free live streaming guide on our website. I'll put those links here throughout the conversation in the chat. But the live streaming guide was really just created to help you and your church start from wherever you're at. If you're with nothing and you guys need to get up and rolling and recording something, here's how you can do it with an iPhone. If you guys have been doing it with an iPhone, but you want to upgrade and take the next step, what would that look like? If you guys are looking at pre-recording, what would that look like in doing a multi-camera shoot? All those different items that churches are asking and have been asking. And as we've gone on in time, I think now everyone's kind of gotten to that point where they've done step one. And so what Carl is our owner at 1230. We both have talked about, don't just stay at step one, take your next step. So what's your next step? What's God asking you and your church to do to increase your reach and increase your quality and content online? That's going to look different for every church. So doesn't mean that you go from one to multi-camera shoots and streams. But like you mentioned, Alex, the Blackmagic ATM Mini that they came out with is something that was rolled out right around this time, and has been a way for churches to integrate multi-camera shoots and to bring people into their room when they're not there physically.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think it's great you're saying the next step. Here at the convention, our goal is to help advance the gospel. To see the gospel, see South Carolina saturated and transformed by the power of the gospel, and to advance the gospel. And we challenge our churches, to be strong churches, and what are their next steps that they are taking towards being strong churches. And I think, right now, part of that church strength is to assess how you can go from where you are to where God wants you to be next, be it not only with the tech that you use, but with the people that are a part of the ministry that you're doing. Talk to me maybe a little bit about just kind of like what you've seen, with the teams, and there's kind of the players involved, and just like the growing of those teams, and just like how to help, those teams during this time.
Yeah. So it's been interesting during this time. I've watched a little bit from the sideline, from, obviously transitioning out of Shannon, but then also being involved with some churches that we work with. When COVID kind of hit, you kind of were limited to just your staff. So now you're bringing people who maybe aren't normally a part of your production environment into a role that they usually don't play, because you need everyone's hands on deck. You can't bring volunteers into your building and expose them. So one thing that we saw was a lot of staff people who maybe had fill roles that they were before, now have being asked to fill roles. And so one thing that I just have preached throughout this time is I think communication and preparation are key. As you're dealing with people in new roles, communicating what like the standards are, what you're looking for, what is, you know, a success, what is a failure. Those are things you need to talk about. Like, don't just assume people know, because some of the people who may be working with you may not have had any experience doing what you're doing. And then as we transition back to possibly, you know, some churches are now starting to regather, you have volunteers who haven't served potentially in months. And so now you're needing to almost to retrain or reorient if there's things that have changed because of this. Like, for example, a lot of churches didn't have a landing page for the stream online. Now they have a church online platform or a free church online landing page, and you're streaming to that landing page and then pumping that out to other places as well. So there's things that may have changed that weren't there before that you would need to you know, in essence, re-communicate the vision of what you're going to do on a Sunday and how that's going to look and what that changes for every single person. But rusty. So I wrote a blog on the 1230 Media blog about staffing your position. So what do you need in order to do church online well? What positions do you need to account for, and what each of those roles will do? And then two, leading your production teams for both in venues, because you're not going to just now be online. You're now adding in the in-house worship experience, which is just as important. So now you're in essence having two services happening at the same time. And so some churches may do the same thing. So Shannon, for a while, we did the same thing online that we did in person. And if that's the case, it might make it real simple, but you just need to have that dialogue and that communication with your team and explain what the plan is and how you guys are going to move forward and whatever your church leadership has decided.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I think what you said is key. Communication. All conflict is resolved by managing expectations and communicating. And, you know, at first it was like, oh, let's just do everything and whatever. And then, you know, kind of the adrenaline died, and now people are really stressed, or, you know, they're stretched to their limit. They're working 80 hours a week. They're bivocational, or now they unfortunately may have, you know, lost a position that they might have had due to budget or whatever. And so being able to manage those expectations is good, because that causes, you know, synergy and just knowing what is expected and defining a win. What does a win look like? Just if you could summarize, maybe Steve, you know, obviously you'll put those links in below, but if you could summarize it, what would you say that, you know, are maybe you know, one or two things that are nuggets that you could pull out of, you know, this team, building your team, and then obviously the creating a sermon for both the online and live experience. Do you have any like nuggets that are in that you would maybe be comfortable out of?
Yeah, so for online, I think one thing that's going to change is you're going to have a team that's dedicated to just your online experience. So you're going to have some sort of online campus host, campus pastor. That's something that I don't think that we as churches have necessarily done a lot. Is a lot of times the online stream's an afterthought. We just pump out from whatever's happening in the mainstream. And I think now people are looking for that connection. And so someone who's connecting to the online audience doesn't have to necessarily be super elaborate. Churches that do it well, and you see it, are Elevation, Passion City Church, you know, Seacoast. A lot of those churches have hosts that come on before the service starts and after, and they're just there to help communicate and be engaged with that church. You're going to need hosts. So something that we noticed that's different is going to, you know, that has changed in light of what you're going to staff, is you're going to need people that are, in essence, greeters for online. So you have door greeters and door holders. You're going to have people who are on your production team because they're going to be going through all the production gear and handling Facebook streams and all that. But I would consider those people like door greeters for online. So you're going to have chatters in the chat who are welcoming people. And you're going to want those people to be consistent, because if you have different people every week, no one's going to really connect. We find that there's going to probably be a drop off in like how much connection. But if it's the same people every week who are in the chat, hosting the experience, talking about what's happening on Sunday, what God's been teaching them through that message, that's how you're going to start to cultivate relationships online, and it's going to become more than just a stream. Yeah, so those are kind of the two nuggets I would pick out with staffing that I think have changed and probably changed for the better in our culture.
Yeah, for sure. You always park in the same parking lot and go to door C, and Sally opens the door for you, and, you know, Bob gives you the bulletin as you sit in the fourth pew from the right. So,
Absolutely.
so those patterns that people have online, that's a great point, man. That like, if I see Steve in the chat, I'm like, hey, what's up, Steve? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like versus like, all right, who's the random host this week that, I'm just a body, so that engagement, we talked a little bit about that last week, engaging with an online audience is critical, versus just, becoming a viewer, being able to engage with that.
Yeah.
I think, in light of obviously times, and we've been talking about, just in general, a little bit about teams, what are, maybe what are some things that you've seen that smaller churches, like here at the SCBC, we try to say that any church, any size, anywhere can advance the gospel.
Mhm.
And so, obviously when you think of like production and a lot of gear and stuff, you think like these big churches, Seacoast, etc. But like, what have you found that like maybe smaller churches can do well and to make that next step? Like or to incorporate, and grow their team, maybe if they don't have like a budget to buy a ATM,
Yeah.
switcher or whatever. Like maybe talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I think it really, really just comes down to having those positions. And if you don't necessarily have the gear to do a huge switch show and just one camera, that's fine. But have that same host. So have that person with the camera who's doing the before you take it into the worship center to host, to show the service. Have that person who's hosting the show, setting up the morning, and then have that same person go set the camera for the service. So it could be as simple as that. There also are some great free resources that I'll post in here in the blog as well. I wrote on OBS. OBS is a software that's kind of become huge. It's free and it allows you to route in camera feeds in essence. So you could really basically, if you have a computer accessible in your church that would handle two inputs, you could have your stream feed and someone who's a host and just simply switch between the two. So there's some really simple ways that don't cost any money to do it. It doesn't have to be the biggest and baddest thing. All that you're doing is creating that connection point because you're having someone who's connecting people to the service and then someone who's connecting out of the service into a response. Because what I think we learned a lot, I saw a lot of churches doing, and it was another book I wrote, was the Zoom guide for churches. And so a lot of churches use Zoom to connect with people after church to try to capture what was happening online actually into their pipeline, so to speak, of actually engaging for prayer and actually engaging who actually accepted Christ today. And so that was really good because I think a lot of time we had forgot about the whole post engagement process, but now you have that connection point with someone saying, hey, we want to connect with you, a pastor's waiting for you, here's the number, or here's a Zoom link in the chat, click on that link and we'll be happy to talk with you. That's been really good. And I think that's caused a lot of churches to actually see growth on their stream with people actually engaging.
Yeah. I mean, as a guy who recently moved to, South Carolina, my only encounter with churches have been, digitally. And I would say that I was very grateful when, I was extended an invitation to be a part of a digital small group using an online platform, and being able to have that additional touch point rather than, just focusing on the Sunday morning service, being able to focus on, being able to talk with people more one-on-one in a more, community-based environment, was definitely beneficial to me. So, I mean, obviously, Steve, there's, that the tech people and the worship people, everybody in church staff really kind of has been in the thick of it. But I would say specifically, those of us who have been helping get the service online, be it worship ministers picking sets who now have become the de facto tech guy or gal, or just being in the thick of things. So what would you just what would you say to like would be some ways that just maybe from a just pastorally, that we could care for those who've been serving nonstop 80 hours for, basically 2-3 months straight. Like, just how can we love and serve those who are in tech? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think one is like we talked about communicating with your team. If you're in leadership, just communicating and getting to know where people are at. One thing that I think is probably under the surface a lot that hasn't really come up necessarily because we're still kind of coming out of it is I think there's going to probably be some burned out people in our church, on our teams, in our ministry. And so if you're a lead pastor, production team, leading a team, whatever team it is, whatever part of your role is in the church, if you can be vigilant to what's happening around and communicate with the people around you and trying to get a gauge on where are they at? Are they burned out? Are they tired? Are they not looking ahead? They're just looking to today and they're just trying to get through it. There's no excitement in what is happening. And if that's the case, just be on the lookout for that. I think too, encouragement is something huge right now, is because we've been relegated to an online culture. One thing that I talked to someone recently and they were just talking about the sheer amount of content that you're trying to produce to engage online. And so you can kind of get sucked into this hole where your team can feel like all I got to do is I do this great one big thing, it gets posted, and the next day I got to do a whole nother thing. And I got to do a whole nother thing. And it's like, it doesn't matter what you've done. The next day you got to do something, you got to hit another home run. And so I think encouraging your team, trying to make, milestones of, hey, that was a win. Great job. Thanks for all, just taking the time to acknowledge that as I think huge. I think that would help a lot of team members, a lot of teams out right now. I think a lot of times I think there's some people struggling with feeling we've been doing it for 3 months and we don't see any end in sight. Is it actually making a difference? So sharing successes, encouraging your team, what's going well, but then at the same time also being open and honest about things that maybe you do need to change. And I think that's something that having those honest conversations with people about where we stand, because that's one thing, if we just continue to roll through this, people may not be communicating with each other. And then we start to have problems where maybe people aren't on the same page. And it's just because we haven't been engaging with a conversation about if there's stuff that needs to change, why does it need to change? What needs to change? How do we go about that in a way that works with everyone who's involved? So,
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's the best way of taking care of your team, is just having conversation. And right now that's hard because we can't necessarily do it in person. It stinks to do it on virtual. A lot of people I work with, they don't want to do it in virtual. They want to get in person, but having those calls and actually asking questions that are actually like, hey, how are you doing? What are you feeling? What's going on in your life? How can I help? How can I be in it with you? Those are what's going to make the difference, I think.
For sure. I mean, technology is just a tool at the end of the day. Rick Warren, would say that, communication is instant, constant, global, and permanent, so like, it's not gonna, just stop. Sundays happen every week. Y'all's podcasts are making Sunday happen. Like, it's Sundays going to happen every week. And so being able to give, pour life into it. It's, people that are in media having the, the ministry of helps and just kind of having that gifting and being able to speak into them and caring about them as a person. I know that's as a high D task oriented person that has very low amount of S. That is a good reminder for me because I have a Asana list of 30 things that I need to get done. And thanks. Now we can do the next thing. So, people are, not seeing their families, not seeing their friends, and then on top of that, doing all these things. So being able to have a way to care for them and be able to just have them be person and not just be a person who is executing a task for you is, that you use technology to help people or use people, to help your technology. And so I would say that we should obviously just use the technology to help our people and especially those who are inclined in that. So, hey man, I just appreciate you, being able to help us out today and, kind of talk with, about anything. Is there anything you would say that would be a good, just kind of a nugget of wisdom that you would give to, those who are in, kind of in the thick of it and who are maybe about, like, they're in it, they're in burnout and like they've been burned out for like 2 months ago. Like, what would you say to that person who's maybe like in the thick of it right now and says, yo, dude, I'm done. I'm not going to render another thing in After Effects. I'm not going to, do another bounce in Audition. Like I'm done. OBS. Yeah. I mean, I'm done. I don't even want to touch my phone. What would you say to those people who are maybe in the thick of it and they're done and they're just kind of done? What would you say to that, man?
Yeah, I think I would just, I think so. I would just share it. One, I think God sees you. wherever you are in that situation. And if you're feeling that, God knows what you've done. He knows what you're doing, and he knows what needs to be done. And ultimately, he's the one who's going to empower us to do that. And so really, I think my challenge would be, and it's something that I've had to preach to myself too, but look to him. Look to why we're doing this. The why we're doing this isn't to produce more content. It's to see people's lives transformed by the gospel. That's why we're doing it. We want people to engage with us online because we want them to meet Jesus. That's the heart of it. We create content not to have something checked off a box in Asana or say that we did we made a great piece. We do it because we want to communicate something about the gospel, and we want to share something about Jesus with people. And right now, I think we're in this time, we have this opportunity to take a medium that has been neglected and use it for reaching people. I mean, there's so many people who are on our feeds who maybe necessarily we haven't done a good job of in person sharing the gospel with and actually taking that accountability about, hey, this is what Jesus has done for me and he can do it for you. But we're now in an online situation where we can blow that up. And so I think for people who are in that thick of it and like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this, I'm exhausted or I'm burned out or I'm struggling, look to Jesus. He's the only thing that's gonna sustain, because if you're trying to look at the next thing or something physically, that's not going to sustain us. And so I just always want to point people to the gospel and why we do things, and it comes back to that. It comes back to loving God and loving people, and that's why we create. That's why we do what we need to do in order to help the gospel message be heard.
Yeah, for sure, man. He is a God who's not unfamiliar with suffering. He is a God who leaves the 99 to go after the one. So yeah, I mean, yeah, if anything, you are loved and you are seen and you are not alone. When our church before we moved here was hit by a tornado right before COVID in Nashville, and then COVID came, the pastor of that church that was destroyed, that's what he would say to everything, is that you are loved, and during this time you are loved, you are seen, and you are not alone. And that sounds like such a kitschy catchphrase, but it's true that the Lord does care. And those who maybe have gone in the media per se to hide and to not know, I know that's me sometimes. I gotta do the video, I can't listen to the sermon today.
Yeah.
So you're loved, you're seen, and you're not alone. And during this time specifically, man. So
and then let me just follow up.
So
I think first is God. You got to look to him. You can't look to anything else. That's not going to satisfy. But secondly, I think as part of looking to, if you're in that situation and struggling, I think there is an element to, after you've talked with God about it, you've reached out to what is my purpose in this? What do I need to come back to the center here on? You also do need to reach out to people. And so if there's someone in your church that you can trust, that you can talk to about what you're feeling, do that. If not, reach out to one of us here at the Good Baptist Convention, or if you just want to shoot me an email, I mean, I'll put my email here, but reach out to someone and talk about, hey, here's what I'm feeling, here's where I'm struggling, I need help, I need prayer, I need someone to help reinvigorate me, whatever it is, just to reach out to someone and talk to someone. And then I think too, you just hit on a good thing. Also immerse yourself in the gospel too. So I think a lot of times those of us who are creating content, don't necessarily take time to just sit under teaching for ourselves. And so like, are you actually being fed each week? Are you listening to the sermon in your church without like the lens of like, what am I doing to edit this? Are you actually just taking time to listen through it and letting it change your heart and impact your life? Or are you just in the role of doing something? And if that's the case, I'd also say, maybe you need to block out an hour time and just go listen to one of the worship services from the past couple of weeks and just engage and enter into a time of worship and unplug a little bit from what you're doing and kind of reorient that a little bit.
Hey man, it's the Martha and Mary, man. The Martha was, doing all the things and thought, she was doing, what, I have to do this, I have to get all the things. And, Mary, was, washing,
sitting at Jesus' feet.
Yeah, for sure. So absolutely, man, dude, I appreciate you, taking time out, thank you. What are some ways, that people can get you dropped your email there. Just what are some maybe other things that 1230 Media has that could be a resource for leaders during this time, man?
Yeah. So I'm going to share with you guys, I wanted to give you guys a couple things and I wanted to give you guys a special deal on that. There's a lot of stuff that's free, the live stream guide. the upload guide, which talks about how to upload content and share it with your team. But I want to also and there's also a virtual choir video. Like if you guys wanted to make a virtual choir video at your church, we've created a free guide on how to do that with a friend of mine named Trey. But I'm going to also drop a couple links for some codes. So we created a all-inclusive handbook on how to do church online, ranging from crafting the worship experience to helpful tips on setting up your stream, ideas for kids' worship experiences, tips for your website, the whole entire, it's a 70-page book. So we want to give that to you guys for 50% off. There's a code, Church Online SC. I'll put the link and that code in the description. If you guys want to go ahead and download that, if that would bless your church, we'd love for you guys to have that. Zoom is kind of maybe phasing in and out. If you're still trying to figure out Zoom and how you could use Zoom, maybe as like a small group discipleship tool, I'll drop the Zoom guide in there for $1. You guys can download that real quick. And then also we've created our Church Online guide. We've created an entire video series. There's 40 videos along with a landing page with all that content there. It's not everything. It's some extra stuff that's not in the book as well, and just videos and some B-roll stuff that you can see what we're talking about in the book. So that would be a good resource if your team is looking for how to maybe change and up your level in some areas, what that would look like, how that actually fleshes out. That's a great resource for you, and I'll drop that there as well.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, 1230 has media there. They're and right here in South Carolina, so they're local boys, and they're here. Their heart really is to help serve the local church. So wherever you are in your journey of needing resources, they're here to help and just be a resource to ask the questions of how do I plug this thing in, or how does that work. They're more than willing to answer those questions. I appreciate you so much, Steve, being a part of this today. Thanks so much for being a part, and we appreciate you. Next week on Let's Talk, we're going to be joined by Cliff Duran. Cliff Duran is a Dove Award-winning arranger. If you've probably sung songs in your church that he has arranged. He is the lead worship minister at Woodstock Baptist in Woodstock, Georgia. And so if you are anything involving music and worship during this time, you would definitely want to come back next week for our Let's Talk with Cliff Duran. So friends, thanks so much for being a part. Remember, as Steve said, you're loved, you are seen, and you are not alone. And we will see you next time on Let's Talk.